From the Ticats Audio Network, this is Ticats Today with Louie B.
Yes, it is Ticats Today for a Friday, April the 29th, 2022. Exactly 4 days until the CFL Global and National Drafts. That's happening on Tuesday. 16 days until the Ticats open up training camp, and 43 days until the Ticats kick off their 2022 season in Saskatchewan against the Riders. Louie B here with you on a Friday afternoon, a beautiful Friday, setting up for a beautiful weekend. And I can let you know as I look outside the window here from the 7th floor at Tim Hortons Field, quarterback Dane Evans hard at work with a couple of his receivers. Looks like Tyler Ternowski's out there, Braylon Addison, and the football season right around the corner. And again, starting to feel like it with a beautiful day today after a very cold week that felt more like February than it did April. But our last show of April, and next week we got a ton of great content for you here on the Ticats Audio Network. As the draft, as mentioned, that's happening on Tuesday night. We'll have special coverage Tuesday night here on the Ticats Audio Network leading up to that. We'll have a draft special that's dropping on Monday. We'll be recapping the draft throughout the week as well, leading up to one of our final weekly Ticats Today episodes as we get ready for the season, which, as mentioned, right around the corner. Oh, we got a great show for you coming up, as in just a little bit we'll be joined by the assistant GM and director of player personnel for the Ticats, Spencer Zimmerman. Lots to get into with him with the draft on Tuesday. Also stopping by will be special teams coordinator and DB's assistant coach, Craig Butler. We'll get into a little bit of the draft with him, as he's got one of the unique positions in the Ticats personnel department, as being one of the only people who has actually gone through this process of being drafted. So we'll talk about that with Coach Butler. We'll talk about some of the rule changes that were announced this week as well, which we're going to get into in just a second. And to wrap up the show, we'll catch up with Jesse Gibbon. He's been down here working out with his teammates. I've seen Kay Okafor here. I've seen Chris Van Zyl and Jesse Gibbon. They've been doing a lot of work down here at Tim Hortons Field, so I had a chance to catch up with him earlier this week. We'll talk about his experiences of being drafted, how his offseason was, and what he's got to do to crack the starting lineup in 2022. We go into all of that with our friend Jesse Gibbon on today's show. All right, as we normally do, let's start the show with some news and notes, and a bit of a busy one league-wide. As mentioned, there were some rule changes announced by the Canadian Football League, and let's run through them because they're definitely pretty interesting to go through, and they're big changes. Not gonna lie, there are some big changes announced by the CFL, and a big one, if you listen to our conversation with the commissioner as part of Randy's road trip here on the Ticats Audio Network, it was almost sort of hinted at. It was definitely hinted at, and that was the hash marks. The hash marks have been moved. On CFL fields, they will be moved closer to center field. Each one will be 28 yards from the nearest sideline instead of 24 yards. And as a result, they will be 9 yards apart instead of 17 yards apart. According to the commissioner, he says moving the ball closer to center will encourage teams to use the entire field and their entire playbooks. That was one of the rule changes. Another one, offenses will get more of a head start, as after a made field goal or single point, drives will start from the 40-yard line instead of the 35-yard line, and that teams kicking off for any reason will do so from their 30 instead of the 35. The only exception is kickoffs following a safety that will now occur from the 20-yard line instead of the 25-yard line, trying to give offenses better starting field position to start offensive series to try and get more scoring and more sustained drives. Another change, strategies to limit opportunities for kick returns will be discouraged more severely, as all no yards penalties will be 15. So whether The receiving team plays it on a bounce, whether they receive it on a clean catch. The opposition, the kicking team, will need to give at least 5 yards. And there's also rules that change around kicks that go out of bounds, as it's now if a punt sails out of bounds before it reaches the 15-yard penalty or 15-yard line, it'll be a penalty instead of 20 yards. So bunch of changes made. You can go to CFL.ca for all of them. And we'll get into it with Coach Butler, and he's got a unique perspective as some of them involve special teams. The hash marks involve, obviously, offense and defense, but particularly, I think Coach Butler can give a good opinion on that, being a former defensive back himself. I've heard mostly positive things. Let me know what you think. You can hit me up on Twitter at Louie B _TV. It's not 4 downs. There are no drastic changes. But let me know what you think. You can hit me up on Twitter at Louie B _TV. That was the big news that dominated this week, and we'll get into all of that coming up later on in the show with Craig Butler. And the one Ticats news note I did want to pass along is the Ticats announced on Thursday, that was yesterday, that they signed American defensive back Lawrence Woods III. He most recently spent training camp with the NFL's New Orleans Saints in 2021. Not the biggest guy, just 5'9", 180 pounds. And he played his college ball over 3 seasons at Truman State University. He's a native of St. Louis, Missouri. So the Ticats filling up their roster ahead of the draft, ahead of training camp. And to discuss that further, very pleased now to be joined by the Assistant General Manager and Director of Player Personnel. It's Spencer Zimmerman. And Spencer, I appreciate you giving me some time today because I have to think you are a very busy man. Just how busy are you ahead of Tuesday's draft?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily busy within, a lot of the work is set, and with respect to, the Canadian draft, obviously Drew's, really been vigilant and kind of compiling, all the information, doing some supplementary interviews, with players that didn't attend the combine. And, as a staff, we get together and we stack our board. But, really this weekend too, there's obviously a draft starting today down south. And for us, it gives us an opportunity to kind of track, some of the draft eligible players in our draft that will get drafted, whether it's day 1, 2, or 3, but also to see, where they land as priority free agents, what type of compensation they get in terms of base salary guarantees and signing bonuses. And it just, helps clarify the equation when we go back to our draft board, because it's obviously in our league, it's not just about the best player, it's the best available player, right? And signability plays a huch factor into that.
You took the question right out of my mouth asking about the NFL draft. What you mentioned some of the things you're looking at, but how big of a factor is the NFL draft in the overall scheme of Tuesday?
I mean, it plays a part. Obviously, there's going to be players that whether we have, on our neg list, but, more specific to your question, on our draft board that, that attended the NFL Combine, that have been brought in on top 30 visits by NFL teams. So they have a high likelihood of ending up in an NFL camp. And I think you get an idea of where they're going to end up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their journey stops there, if they happen to be released. But I do think, to answer your question, it definitely plays a factor in how we stack our board based on, we're looking for the best players to come in and contribute to the 2022 Hamilton Tiger Cats. And obviously, some of the other picks we hope to have, down the future, but we really need to focus on getting the best players on the field for 2022.
You mentioned Drew, and you and him have a relationship that goes back years. But now that you're back in the room together, you add in an experienced voice like Ed Hervey. Orlando has seen it all in his time in the CFL. What has that collaboration been like in the draft war room, having those different voices? And was it easy to kind of find that chemistry to get everybody on the same page?
Yeah, I think we've had a couple test runs with free agency. When we all kind of got together, even at the start of January when we were talking about, our own roster. And I really think, obviously Ed has been through several drafts. When I mean several times three. And obviously I've been through a couple, and Drew's been through multiple as well. So we've done things at different places, but Drew and I have obviously done things together, and so it's a collaborative process. The coaches are involved in as well, especially with their respective positions, because, ultimately the coaches are going to be coaching the players, right? And they're going to have the chance to take them from what they saw on film and hopefully not only add them to the room to contribute, but help them grow, as players and people as well. So everyone's played a part, our athletic therapy staff, our equipment staff, our operations staff, and we're definitely excited for Tuesday.
G. Roy Simon, assistant GM in the Edmonton Elks, said earlier in this offseason that you have to get into the head of other GMs during the draft process. Is that something that you guys do? Is that a fair assessment, that you almost have to predict, knowing the different characters and the different people who are in the CFL, that when you are making your draft boards, you're relying on some of that past information of just thinking like, hey, I've been in meetings with this guy. Here's what he typically says. Is because the CFL is so small, is that a pretty big factor?
I think it's a element that you can definitely go through the exercise of doing, whether it's through mock drafts, whether it's through researching teams' rosters and addressing team needs. I just think you need to balance that with that plan not working, and then having to go through, 5, 10, 15 iterations and still, never the plan coming together. So kind of the proof is in the pudding. You try to stick to your draft board, but you talk about scenarios of if this player did fall, if this player was available, would we move up? Is there anyone that's looking to move up? I think you go through that process, and that's what we, have taken the last couple of days and this weekend to talk about. But it's hard to project what another organization is going to do because, ultimately scouting is very subjective, and building a roster is subjective. Everyone has their own vision of what they want to see, and it's hard to replicate that. You can make educated guesses, but we try to stay true to what our team needs are, and ultimately who are the best players and best fits for us.
Looking at the draft class as we are heading into Tuesday, what's your overall assessment of what to make of the first round, the first couple of rounds? What do you think is kind of going to be the big story of the draft?
I think the storyline is going to be there's going to be multiple rounds of players selected to CFL clubs. As boring as that sounds, I know I wish I could give you a more salacious answer.
Come on, everybody's trading up, everybody's trading down. Come on, give me something.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, our process has been no different than it was in free agency. And you're going to hear this a lot. Is we're going to explore every avenue of player acquisition, right? And there's multiple avenues, and we're going to do what's best for the 2022 team and obviously the organization for the future. So to project what another team might do might not happen till 5-10 minutes before that pick. But our responsibility right now is to talk about it, go through that scenario, and form some type of agreement on how we would approach that situation if it happens. But ultimately, like the draft and anything, it's fluid. You have to be nimble, and you have to be willing to react. And the preparation, like we talked about, is already kind of behind us. And Tuesday just becomes to reacting to what happens when we're on the clock.
And you mentioned projecting, and if you're looking at who you have signed on the roster, where guys played last year, I've projected what I think the depth chart is going to be looking like heading into the season, and there's really no obvious holes. I would make the case. Does that take away some pressure of the players that you're drafting? Not that you're saying you don't have to compete for a spot, but I mean your roster seems pretty set right now. Is there any truth to that sentence that the guys you draft might not have to face a whole lot of pressure heading into camp?
Yeah, well, ultimately with all the players, all our players, we're looking for players who are intrinsically motivated, right? It's obviously the coaches, Coach O and the staff do a great job of activating that internal motivation and providing the resources and a vision to execute and accomplish. But we don't really place any pressure on anyone coming in the building. I mean, the pressure's on themselves to be successful and obviously work in the environment that we're providing for them to compete for a championship. So I think with any pick, we are looking for highly motivated players, competitive players. So whoever we draft, I think that that quote unquote pressure is going to be felt within themselves. But regards to team needs, I think it's difficult with the CFL draft. I think it's hard to just draft solely on needs, and it's hard just to stay true to your board. So there's always that happy medium, like I said, that kind of reactive component of the planning that comes into it. Whether it's one or two players that maybe fall to us at 17, could 8 change that if the players are closely graded? Absolutely. But ultimately, like if there's a wide gap, no different than in the NFL, right? They have their board, and their board is, vertically stacked by position, vertically stacked by the players at that position and horizontally across. And, when there's a huge gap, on that magnet of a player that sticks out, versus all the other position needs, you're going to hear most of the NFL GMs say, we're going to draft the best player. We're going to draft that player when there's a huge gap. But, when there's something close, on that board, horizontally, you're going to look to, see who has the best chance of obviously making your roster or filling an area of depth or an area of need.
One more before I let you go. Outside of the draft, looking at some roster spots, no official announcements yet. There are still a few spots left before camp. How busy are you expecting to be outside of the draft in the next few weeks?
Yeah, tremendously active. And I think that's the other part to this process. Once we get through the first 3 days of the draft, like I said, there'll be a lot of activity on the undrafted free agent market or the priority free agent market. So, we have our own boards with our American players, the players that we're targeting, that we're seeing, where they're going to land. And if they don't land, we'd obviously love them to get them up here. So that's kind of when the communication heats up, on that front. And then following that, there's mini camps where players will go without contracts and try to earn a spot. We try to track those as well to see who we can fall through, because we definitely have a couple roster spots, that we're looking to add prior to, the next 2 weeks when we step on the field.
Yeah. 2 weeks. 2 weeks on Sunday. Ticats open training camp, just a few days away from the draft. Zim, I know you're busy, so thanks for spending some time with me this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Louie. Take care.
That is the Assistant General Manager and Director of Player Personnel for the Ticats, Spencer Zimmerman. And he mentioned Drew Alamang, Assistant GM and Director of Canadian Scouting. And he, along with Orlando Steinauer, President of Football Ops and head coach, spoke to the media earlier this week. And if you missed that, you can find it right here on the Ticats audio network in full. And Drew addressing the both local and national media ahead of next week's draft. Speaking of the draft, usually a spot where players who are drafted and come to the team usually have to start on special teams. So it's a big spot on the field for rookies and the draft, and some recent rule changes affecting special teams as well. And to discuss that, very pleased to be joined by the special teams coordinator. He's also an assistant DB coach, a former Ticat, and a draft pick out of Western University back in the day. Craig Butler is with us, and Coach, lots to get into with the rule changes in the draft, but let's start with your position as special teams coordinator. Just how different has this year been for you preparing for the season compared to a positional coach back going into 2021?
Yeah, well, it's definitely been an adjustment period as far as the preparation goes. Obviously, being a defensive backs coach and working with the defense, now being in that coordinator role, right, you just take on different job responsibilities and looking at it, instead of looking at your individual kind of room, you got to look at it as an overall picture. And, it's at times it's been, the checklist kind of grows, but as since we've been back in the office, those boxes have been getting checked, and we know to bounce ideas off all our different coaches. And it's been much different, but I've been loving it and looking forward to putting it all to field and see how it works.
And special teams is such an unique position group on the field, because you will have guys who play offense. You'll have guys who play defense. I have to imagine that having a Coach Washington, a Coach Tommy, an Orlando around has made this transition a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, first of all, I've been around some great special teams coaches too since I've kind of been with Hamilton. So that's been a huge part of my development, not only as a coach but as a person. And then, when you mention names like Tommy and Mark and Coach O, everyone's kind of a master in their own area and they have their own expertise. So being able to get ideas and talk things through with them and all of our assistant coaches, I mean, that's kind of what football is all about, right? Is gaining ideas from everybody else. And you don't really know if it's going to work, if it's a good idea, if it's a bad idea until you try to put it in the practice field. So that's kind of where we're at right now, is formulating our plan and our ideas and get everything ready to go for that first day of camp.
Now, the draft happening next week on Tuesday. And again, I go back to your role as a special teams coordinator, because often we see guys who are drafted who make the team have a huge role on special teams. You go back to Miles last year, Mason, the names kind of keep adding up. What do you make of the draft class in 2022 and, the team's plan heading into Tuesday?
Yeah, well, just as far as the class, I mean, there's definitely, skill positions you kind of see higher on the board than maybe years past, as far as receivers and some DBs and things like that. It's interesting because, when you evaluate and you watch film and, the personnel does their due diligence as far as conducting interviews and doing all the background stuff, you get only a certain amount of information, right? And a lot of times is when you decide to draft a player, when they show up to camp and when they kind of get on the field, that's when a different type of evaluation begins, right? So I know from the past, our personnel department has done an outstanding job of finding the right people that fit this organization, first and foremost. And then as coaching staff, it's our job to, get the best out of what they do well. And so, whoever we decide to get and decide to take and, who we're able to get, we work with their skill set. And I'm excited to work with some new guys. And like you said, when majority of these players getting drafted, their first opportunity to show what they can do is going to be on special teams.
You mentioned the personnel, and I believe you are the only person in the front office or on the coaching staff who's actually gone through the process of being drafted in the Canadian Football League. What advice do you have for players who are going to hear their names called on Tuesday?
Well, my only advice would just to be yourself. I mean, there was a question that always asked me, or that I got asked going through it, is who do you model your game after? And it wasn't to be, overconfident or anything like that, but I just said I modeled myself after Craig Butler. And I think it was just because I didn't think there was anybody, like me, even though there's people a lot better than me, but that was just kind of my mentality going into it. I was going to be myself. And you just need to be able to, bring whatever you bring to the table and be able to help the team in any way you can, right? Not kind of stuck with I'm going to be in this position, because you may be. I mean, you look at a guy that's on our team that plays offensive tackle and who's been in the league for, I think, 15 years, maybe longer. He got drafted and he played defensive tackle his university career. So, but a coach saw him in a different ability, and now he's going to be a future Hall of Famer. So I think just being able to be adaptable to what your team needs, and but bringing your skill set, and just you want to contribute to win any way you can.
Let's talk about these rule changes the CFL announced this week, and you have an interesting perspective, having played DB, having now being the special teams coordinator. Let's start with the hash marks, because as a defensive back, what do you make of that? Do you believe it's going to make the secondary's job more difficult, or how do you look at that rule change?
Yeah, I don't know if difficult's the word. I think there's going to be an adjustment period for all three sides of the ball, as far as these rule changes, not only the hashes, but everything else. So there will be an adjustment period for the offense. There'll be an adjustment period for the defense. And then obviously special teams will have, its period too. But, DBs, man, like the job is what it is. It's difficult, but I mean, everybody's in the same boat. So that's something, I understand why they're doing it, to kind of get some more offensive flow going. And, I think it will accomplish that. And I think, like I said, there will be an adjustment period as well for the offense. But, obviously into the boundary, there's going to be a little bit more field for that weak side linebacker, or, your corner, your halfback to cover. So you may see some different variations of coverages, but at the end of the day, the fundamentals haven't changed. They haven't made any rules about your technique. Those still remain the same. So that's really what the focus is. And all these rules are things that we don't control. And, we all abide by the same thing, all other 9 teams.
The no yards one jumps out as well. As a first-year special teams coordinator, does that make it a little bit easier knowing you're going into a season where you only know this rule the one way? And for American players who are coming up who are hearing about no yards for the first time, is there going to be a little bit of an adjustment period for them too?
I think it's just what you emphasize, right? You get out whatever you put in and whatever you emphasize, whether it's technique, rules, schemes, whatever you emphasize in practice and in meetings, it's what you're going to get from the players. So I know for us, it'll be a big point of emphasis, because a 15-yard penalty is as bad as a roughing the passer penalty in our minds. So, we'll emphasize that right from day one. And yeah, it'll be an adjustment. We'll definitely know that it'll be something that's emphasized as far as how they call it. So we need to make sure that we understand the rules and just give ourselves the best position and the best understanding to limit the amount that actually, get called.
And before we let you go, Coach, I've been around the stadium the last few weeks, and there's something that's standing out to me, and it's the normalcy. The idea that guys can work out together in different position groups. There's no tiers. There's no quarters. How nice has it been being back at the stadium with this sense of normalcy, and considering everything that happened last year? How's that going to help you heading into 2022?
Yeah, I mean, last year was it was an exception to how we do things, of course. And just being able to kind of get back into the swing of things, it's kind of like, not saying it never happened, because there's a lot of skills and a lot of different things that we learned from last year about how we can operate and how we can do things. But definitely being able to be in the room with the guys during meeting time is going to be huge. As much as we're excited to be at the stadium, we're excited to get to McMaster in a couple weeks too. So just being able to go there and do our training camp at those facilities is going to be outstanding. And it's nice to have some be able to see people's faces in the building too.
And I remember talking to Coach Reinbold about it last year, because special teams is such a big group. I don't think there was a meeting in which everybody in special teams was in the same place at the same time. So again, just how nice that's going to be able to address your field all at once.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's really what this game's about, is about building that bond and building that culture within your group and your subgroup. So it's hard to do that when it's all virtually and it's all over the computer. As much as we tried to establish that, at times we found the difficulties in it. So just being back in the same room all together, being able to share laughs and go through the struggles and the good times and the bad times together is kind of what brings a group together. And it's a long season, so you got to be able to like the guy you're sitting next to, and I think you can only do that if you're hanging out with them and spending as much time with them as you can.
Well said, Coach Butts. I know you're busy. Thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks, Louie.
And that is the special teams coordinator and assistant DBs coach for your Ticats, Craig Butler. All right, as mentioned several times throughout this show, the CFL draft just a few short days away. That is on Tuesday. And a reminder to make sure you're locked here to the Ticats audio network for exclusive draft day coverage, including pre-draft coverage, post-draft coverage, and of course Ticats Day to wrap it all up next week. But I wanted to go back and speak to someone who has gone through the draft experience recently. And that's Jesse Gibbon. Jesse Gibbon, a Hamilton kid, selected by the Ticats in the first round, second overall in the 2019 CFL draft, and I had a chance to catch up with Jesse in the hallways of Tim Hortons Field earlier this week, and we started our conversation by reflecting on his memories from his draft day back in 2019.
Oh, I remember being with family. I remember receiving probably about, felt like 50 phone calls. And I remember, nerves, naturally. And, seeing my face and, my film pop up on the TV screen was a bit surreal, that was obviously the goal, right? To play and get drafted, but it was certainly surreal.
Did you have an inkling that the Ticats were going to choose you? What were you thinking? Which team were you thinking on draft night?
Shoot, you see all those mock drafts and all that kind of stuff, so it was really hard for me to tell. I had no idea in terms of the draft order. In the back of my head, I'm always thinking Hamilton, I'm from there, all that kind of stuff. My parents thinking the same thing, and honestly, I had no idea. I had a bunch of phone calls. I can't say that there was one team more than others. I know that I did have a frequent number of phone calls with the Ticats, so I was kind of in that, and I trained with Filer. So it was kind of it felt like he was kind of like Brian, or he was talking to me a little bit more, that kind of thing. So I was like, shoot, it'd be cool to, get out there, and that's how it happened. So
when you put the last 3 seasons into perspective, from, being drafted 2019, coming out, learning the game, making it to the Grey Cup, and then everything kind of gets put on hold with the pandemic. What have you been through the last 3 years as a player?
Oh, I can tell you for sure I've been through a lot of growing pains as a player. I've been through, the pandemic, I guess, helped a lot of people kind of realize how much they love football, and it kind of put that back in my mind. Not that I wasn't there in the first place, but it kind of reaffirmed it. Gosh, really missing football, and it just allowed me to reevaluate things I need to work on, and it was a long pandemic, and it just made me so happy to have CFL back, and
What did you take from Coach Gibson last year? He was in his first year here. You were in your second, trying to get some playing time. But what did you get out of Coach Gibson last year that you're hoping to build on this year?
So the work ethic, obviously that was a big thing, and that Gibson preaches. And I know work ethic, building it, and what's it called? What else did I learn?
It's the lunchbox theory, right?
Yeah, the tool belt.
He's really he's old school. There's old schoolness to him, right?
He kind of embodies that, kind of the hardworking, and kind of a little bit what you see in Hamilton. It's kind of that get your nose dirty kind of thing. Yeah. It was we were a physical group. He brought more running into the game, so obviously it's. We play a 3-down sport. It's a run and a pass often, but, he really tried to drive home doing more run. And, he just brought, the intensity out on the field. It was a nice shift, and I think it really worked in our favor. And, throughout the season, a lot of guys kind of embodied that hardworking kind of, spirit, I guess. Mm-hmm. But.
Do you know what you're going to have to do to get into the lineup consistently heading into this season? Because obviously that was a bit of a, being the man, being the guy who's dressed but not getting out there. Do you know what you have to do?
So I'm going to have to do a better job of my technique. That's one thing I certainly have to improve on. Kind of keeping my confidence high. I think it's extremely, extremely important. And again, this comes back to Coach Gibson. He is a technique guru, and being able to have really, really good technique going in forward, and just making it almost unconscious competence, just being able to do exactly what I need to do when I hear the call. That's what I think.
You mentioned competence. Mm-hmm. There's a mental aspect of that. We talked about the pandemic and the joy of playing football and getting to be here. How do you think you've grown mentally as a football player and as a person?
I think it's kind of helped me learn what it takes to be a professional athlete. The first year you kind of learn the hard way. You kind of have to put a lot more effort in, and it kind of gets tiring. But now kind of like knowing the formula, knowing what works, having veteran guys kind of like, usher me in and try to like get me into a position of success. It is huge. It is a huge mental thing, and a lot of things that O brings up. He always has this positive mindsets. Nothing's impossible kind of thing like that. Like a lot of those types of mindset have helped throughout the year. So
safe to say you're motivated
for
this
sure.
season?
Oh yeah, easily yes. Short answer, yes.
And that is Jesse Gibbon, a first-round pick back in 2019 of the Hamilton Ticats offensive lineman, looking to crack his spot on the starting offensive line heading into 2022. And I will admit that during that interview, Coach Mike Gibson, offensive line coach, walked by and gave us a look as we were doing that interview. And it just so happened to be during the question where I asked him what he needs to do to crack the starting spot in 2022. So all the best to Jesse Gibbon as he tries to do that ahead of camp, and to everybody coming to camp in just a few short weeks. May 15th, literally right around the corner. 2 weeks on Sunday. Ticats Open Training Camp should be a lot of fun. Before we go, I wanted to include a couple of shout-outs, and I want to start with our accounts. She works in accounts here, Edwina Evans. It was her last day. She retired, and we had a nice little shindig for her down here at Tim Hortons Field. So best of luck in retirement, Edwina. You have been a pleasure to get to know at the Ticats and the Hamilton Sports Group, so best of luck in retirement. Shout out to my buddy Ryan. It's his 30th birthday today. Happy birthday, buddy. And shout out to one of the best to ever do it. Rick Jenneret is calling his last game for the Buffalo Sabres tonight. A good Niagara boy. And, as somebody who grew up across the Niagara River, it was Rick Jenneret, of course, a soundtrack to a generation and all generations of Sabres fans. So all the best, RJ, again in retirement. And looking forward to hearing his goal call one last time tonight. All right, that'll do it for us. We are back for exclusive content throughout the week next week. So make sure you subscribe to the Ticats Audio Network. Like us, review us. Hit me up on Twitter at Louie B _TV. For the Ticats Audio Network, I'm Louie B. Hoping you have a great day.